Hello, I'm Rob Hallam and welcome to another edition of Car File. Now this week, as we promised, we're getting all sexy with you with some very nice coupes. So let's have a look at the cars that we're going to be covering. Well, starting off in France, we've got the very lovely Peugeot 406 Coupe, styled by Pininfarina and based on that very popular 406 saloon. Now, staying in Europe but moving over to Italy, and again, Pininfarina designed, it's the Alfa GTV. 3 litre, 220 horsepower, it's bound to be exciting. Again in Europe, but this time with the fatherland, we're on to Audi, the Audi TT. 4-wheel drive and a shape that you either love or you hate. So without further ado, on with the programme.
We Brits have always been suckers for coupes. After all, we bought the Ford Capri in huge numbers when the rest of Europe derided it. Vauxhall had to set up a new factory for the Calibra in Finland to satisfy our demands. So why do we like them so much? Well, in theory, they combine all the attributes of a saloon car and without the overt, I must recapture my youth image of a ragtop. We've got two of the best on show here at the castle, Peugeot's 406 Coupe and Volvo's C70. The C70 will make any Volvo-loving architect or accountant's toes curl. It's beautiful, well, for a Volvo, with those muscular, smooth and sensual lines which tell you all about the car's dynamic abilities, and yet retaining the all-important traditional elements, so the grille and the V-shaped bulge across the bonnet still look very familiar. The 406 Coupe has stunning good looks, and unlike the C70, it doesn't really reflect any traditional Peugeot traditions, except the badge on the grille. It's a unique combination of Pininfarina pen design and a certain Gallic flair. Volvo haven't exactly been renowned for their coupes in the past. If you're as old as me, you'll remember the Saint swanning around in a P1800. But that was then, and this is now. So why have Volvo gone back to the coupe concept after 20-odd years? Well, it's a result of a collaboration between their British designer, Peter Horbury, and Tom Walkinshaw's TWR racing outfit, who did the engineering on this car. Now, I have to say, for such a great-looking car, the interior is a bit of a disappointment. I think the trouble is the colour, and this uniform dull grey with dark wood actually makes you feel rather depressed when you look at it. And the instrument layout is hardly ergonomic. The switches seem rather scattered around, and you're not quite sure where everything is. Very good hi-fi system. The sound is absolutely perfect, but all the controls are down here on the set itself, and you have to look down at it and fiddle around as you're driving along. And I always feel in that situation you're about to look up and find ERF being printed across your forehead. The seats are very comfortable and very supportive, but you'd expect no less in a Volvo. There's 3 versions of Volvo's 5-cylinder engine on offer in the coupe. First comes the naturally aspirated 170 brake horsepower unit, then there's the low pressure turbo version which churns out 193 brake horsepower, and if you're a real petrol head you can go for the full-blooded 240 brake horsepower version which gives you sub 7-second 0 to 60 performance. So Volvo have gone all slick and sporty, yet somehow managed to retain an air of awkwardness, safety and stability. Not a bad motor, one that will turn heads at traffic lights and in the executive car park, not just because it's so pretty, but because it's a Volvo. This is the 170 brake horsepower version in what they call the touring chassis. Performance perfectly adequate, I mean 0 to 60 in around 9 seconds. Handling, well, it's smooth and quiet and relaxed, as you'd expect for a car of this size and weight. If you go for the 240 brake horsepower version, then they strap the chassis down into sports mode and fit ultra low aspect ratio tyres. The result is that you feel every nook and cranny in the road surface, but you can pretend you're a BTC racer. Volvo, like most of the prestige marques, have been generous with the range of standard equipment offered with the C70 Coupe at a cost. These extras include alloy wheels, anti-lock brakes, a pollen filter, electric and heated door mirrors, and a very powerful stereo with CD player that's perfect when you pull up at the traffic lights. So that's the C70 Coupe. Not a great car, but certainly not a bad car either. Best described as a conservative sports coupe, but if you're a Volvo driver, you'll probably love it. So, what's the competition like from La Belle France? When the 406 Coupe was first launched, some of my colleagues in the motoring press expressed disappointment that the interior looked pretty much the same as the 406 Saloon. So we received an exotic press release the other day saying that Peugeot have upgraded the 406 Coupe for the millennium. Basically meant they put some chrome strips around the outside of the instruments, they changed the position of the stereo and the air conditioning switches, and then given the gear lever an aluminium top. If that's all the millennium means to Peugeot, Lord help us. Anyway, it still looks pretty much the same as the old 406 Saloon, but for the drop-dead good looks of the car, you're willing to forgive it anything. It must be said, the 406 Coupe is a very nice car indeed, and sales are bearing witness to it. According to Peugeot, the Coupe has the same wheelbase as the 406 Saloon, but derives its own distinct appearance by being 5 centimetres lower, 4.9 centimetres longer at the front, and 3.2 centimetres shorter at the rear, making it 1.7 centimetres longer than the Saloon. It's all very interesting, but what really gives it its own distinctive appearance is that Pininfarina design. This is the 194 brake horsepower 3-litre V6 version of the 406 Coupe, and I think this engine suits the Coupe's looks far better than the alternative 2-litre unit. Not to put that down too much, I mean, still the car does 137 miles an hour, but in this version with the V6 you've got almost 150 mile an hour performance and a 0 to 60 figure below 8 seconds. And it seems to really press on. The 406 Coupe prices start at £20,875 on the road for the 2-litre versions, rising to £22,695 for the SE version, £24,270 for the V6 and £27,020 for the V6 SE top spec. Now that compares with £25,665 for the basic 2.4-litre C70 and £30,965 for the top spec T5. So, which of these delectable coupes to choose? Now, I've always been a Pininfarina fan. I used to think that great Italian design house's best was the Fiat 130 Coupe, but with the 406, they've surpassed themselves. The car looks so good on the road. Not to say the Volvo's a bad car, but it's very expensive. It hasn't been selling too well, we hear, and the depreciation at the moment in the trade guides is pretty fierce. So for me, it has to be the 406. But I wouldn't have it in this colour.
Amongst the many cars that I've driven, none, not even the supercars, have been so drop-dead gorgeous, so stunning, such a crowd puller as this, the new Audi TT. Now, if Citroën can use a supermodel like Claudia Schiffer to advertise a mundane Zara, imagine the stunner that Audi would have to come up with to advertise this TT. It's a car I've waited a long time to drive, the excitement of waiting for it to arrive, that first blast down your favourite country lane. And when it's parked up, the sort of crowds it attracts to take a good look is amazing. Very few cars elicit that sort of respect these days. But, and I'm afraid that there is a but, despite its stunning looks, this 180 brake horsepower TT is not quite the car that you'd hoped for in terms of driving performance. Now, I've driven it every day for the past week. Don't get me wrong, it's not a bad car, but there are one or two minus points. The power plant is my main gripe about the car. This is the same 1.8 turbocharged engine that Audi use in the A3, but with more power in this case, 180 brake horsepower. And unfortunately, it just doesn't feel that quick on the road. Sure, if you came from a less powerful car into this one, you'd be happy, but come from a similarly powered car, and I think you'd be rather disappointed. There will be two versions though, this and the 225 brake horsepower version available soon. The TT shares the same platform as the VW Golf, the Audi A3 and even the Skoda Octavia. It's all part of the VW Group's vision for the years ahead. But at the end of the day, you don't notice any of that, so I can't see any drawbacks. The TT has stayed virtually the same design as the original concept shown at the 1995 Frankfurt show. Very little cars manage that, and it's testament to Audi's foresight and courage. Next in the range is the TT Roadster 2-seater, probably available early 2000. My impressions of the TT to drive are on the whole very good, apart from this particular model just being a little underpowered. There's no kick in the back acceleration, it doesn't exactly roar away from the lights, but it feels a superbly poised car to drive when you push it hard and have a bit of fun. It does feel very safe and secure, of course thanks to Audi's four-wheel drive Quattro system. It corners and handles superbly. You'd be hard-pressed to get this car out of shape, but of course you can't defy the laws of physics. Push any car hard and be silly in it, and you'll probably end up in the bushes. Now, our test car doesn't seem to be running quite as smoothly as we would have hoped. There seems to be a little hesitation and accelerating as if something's missing slightly. Also have to say that the gearbox of the TT is not as slick and as smooth as we've come to expect from Audis. It's rather notchy going across the gate, particularly the shift from first to second, which makes no fun in accelerating hard. The brakes are excellent, the steering is nicely weighted with just the right amount of feel. So, if you wanted a TT, well, the news is that the wait from your local Audi dealer could be anything up to 10 months. The order banks are full. Don't worry though, residual values when they start coming through on the used market should be absolutely excellent. This TT has no real direct rival to pit it up against. It's great fun to drive, it's tremendous value for money, and believe me, you'll be the envy of your neighbours.
Oh, I tell you what, with all these sexy cars, I'm feeling all romantic. Anyway, that's it for part one, but if you do like your cars curvy, keep watching, because in part two we've got loads more for you. See you in a bit.
Welcome to the Nevada desert, one of the hottest places anywhere. And this is the Chrysler PT Cruiser, the hottest car in the world. And over there is Las Vegas. Driving into Las Vegas is absolutely weird. It just appears out of nowhere in the middle of a desert. Despite its hot rod looks and a 2.4-litre engine for a relatively small car, certainly by American standards, do not expect hot car performance. The PT Cruiser lives up to its name. It is a cruising machine. It's whisper quiet. Coming into Vegas we were doing just under 70, and this car was so silent. The only noise you can hear is the aircon. And believe me, in Las Vegas, you need aircon, and plenty of it. It's got a very, very composed ride on the road. It's mega comfortable. It seems to handle well. Out here in the desert and driving, I have to concede there aren't too many really tight bends where you can push it on. But it seems to be very composed, and I think it'll settle very well on English roads. The PT in Cruiser actually stands for personal transport, but it could just as easily stand for practical transport. We're told there are over 30 different seating variations, which turns the Cruiser into one of the most versatile vehicles on the road. There's no doubt the PT Cruiser is one real high roller, but it's time to head back to reality and sadly leave the madness of Las Vegas behind us.
It doesn't always pay to be the loudest in your class, and just because a car's new doesn't mean it immediately has to be the most expensive or the fastest, the biggest or the cheapest in its class. At least that's what Vauxhall would have us believe when it comes to the launch of this, the new Astra Coupe, their new entry into the ever-burgeoning lifestyle-led coupe market. If you approach it stealthily and catch it by surprise, particularly at the rear, there's something of the glamorous Volvo C70 Coupe about it. I don't know what, it might be to do with the way the rear pillars meet up with the bodywork or perhaps the shape of the glass, but it does. And that's a good thing because Vauxhall are positioning their new coupe right in the middle of the market, so it's neither a big glamorous coupe nor a pocket rocket like the Ford Puma. Don't let the rather conservatively designed exterior fool you, because inside they just go crazy. There's a huge range of options to choose from. If you go for leather, you can pick from 3 different colours, or you can even have this, let's say, striking is the best way to put it, Alcantara and leather mix. Then you can specify the colour of the centre console. You can have this finish or a kind of bronzy one. Then there's your dials, black or white. Then there's surrounds on the dials. They can be aluminium or chrome. And there's all the bells and whistles in here too. We have all the toys we need to keep us entertained on a long journey. So we've got a CD player as standard, air conditioning, of course. And as a rather expensive optional extra, there's full colour screened interactive satellite navigation system. There's certainly no shortage of kit in here. And once you've specified it up to the way you want it, it will probably be more or less unlike any other you meet. There'll be 3 trim levels for the UK, with the top spec reserved for the 2-litre turbo. And good news, it comes ready boy racered up for you, with a special big chromy tailpipe adornment and, believe it or not, coloured brake calipers, as well as meaty 17-inch alloy wheels. It must have been very tempting for the designers just to take the ordinary Astra Sport chassis and bung a nice slopey coupe body on it. But bless them, they didn't. They worked a bit harder than that. So they've modified the suspension quite a lot. We've got firmer springs and increased damper rates, whatever that is. We've also got a lot lower car, so what you get is a much more coupe-like ride and drive. Every panel of the coupe is entirely new. The design comes courtesy of collaboration with Italian styling house Bertoni, in whose factory the car will be built. Ah, yes, oily bits. Well, you get a choice of 3 engines. It starts with a 1.8 litre. There's this, which is a 2.2 all aluminium, completely new engine, which is actually very, very strong. It's got huge mid-range. All the power seems to be up to and around 3 to 4 to 5,000 revs, which is great for punting it between corners. Then there is the top fire-breathing 2-litre turbo with about 190 odd brake horsepower, 0 to 60 in something like 6.7 seconds, and a top speed of 149. Quite fast. The frameless doors, a real coupe styling cue, were considered a must-have by the suits in charge, and it may not have been easy to achieve. It's always rather difficult getting pillarless doors to seal properly, but it looks proper and it makes things easier when the cabriolet comes along, which it will. I think they're right not to try and set the world on fire with their new coupe. If you want to be glamorous, buy a Fiat coupe. If you want to zap around town at high speed, buy a Ford Puma. If you want to be très élégant and chase the sun in the south of France, buy a Peugeot 406 coupe. But for punters looking for a good, solidly built, probably very reliable and certainly very handsome coupe from a big brand manufacturer for between 16 and 20 grand, I reckon Vauxhall have just about got it sorted.
Now you'd think my job was quite straightforward, but every now and again you do need some quite specialised equipment, and today's one of those days. And why? Because of this thing, Alfa GTV. It's got a 3-litre 24 valve V6, 0 to 60 in just over 6.5 seconds. So what specialist equipment do I need? It's not a crash helmet, it's my oven gloves, because my mum always said, be careful when you're messing with hot things. Now just before we go for a drive, I've got to show you this. These days, most manufacturers, they put a big plastic cover over the engine that says, don't mess with it. Not Alfa, just check that out. Absolutely gorgeous. You could frame that and put it on the mantelpiece. But to me, that just says that this car is hot. Now I've got rid of the oven gloves because although I'm daft, I'm not that daft enough to try and drive a car with them, but especially not this one. 200 brake horsepower and front wheel drive, well, it's a little bit interesting. You put your foot down in first and second, pulling away, and you get a lot of torque effect through that steering wheel, so there's no one-handed cruising business whilst pulling away with the lights. But it certainly makes life interesting. Now I'll come back to the engine in a minute, but to deal with the interior, everything about this car says style and individuality. I like the way the dials are laid out, the seats, they're all laid out a little bit differently, and even the way the actual switches work, that sort of thing, it just gives you that feel that someone's actually spent a lot of time almost handcrafting this car. Now if I was being picky, a couple of things that I don't like on the car, the seats, although they look gorgeous, I'd like a little bit more side support, because with 220 horsepower to play with, you're going to be giving it some stick around the corners. And the biggest downfall really with any coupe is headroom. Legroom's fine, but I have to scoot down a little bit to see through that windscreen. And as for the back seats, well, don't be thinking you'll be giving the local basketball team a lift home. That's purely shopping space, because there ain't much of that in the boot either. So back to the engine, well, it's absolutely amazing. First of all, the sound. You can never beat the sound of an Alfa anyway, and it feels really purposeful and business-like. But the actual torque that's produced, as I say, you've got 6 gears to play with, and all through the gears, all through the rev range, it's pulling. Even in 6th gear at 1500 revs, you put your foot down and that's it, you're away. And the main thing with the car, with the engine coupled to that awesome Alfa chassis, it just feels to give you a lot more feedback than, say, the Audi TT, which although is a fantastic ride, it's almost perhaps too refined. This feels a lot more like a driver's car, more like a racing car, I guess, and perhaps a little bit more fun. Well, I can honestly say that this Alfa is the most exciting car I've driven in a long way. Alright, it might not have the stopping ability of the TT, and that torque steer can be a little bit disconcerting, but really that just adds to the excitement of it. And I think the other good thing about the Alfa is it's not pigeonholed in its image. You could see a young executive showing off his style in it, or maybe even your dad reliving his youth. They're all going to get a heck of a lot of fun out of this car. And if you're prepared to give it some stick, it'll give you plenty back.